So as Stan Lee would say, welcome, true believers. This is Superheroes in Color. My name is Wesley Hall, and I've been collecting and researching Black comic book characters for over 20 years now. A little while ago, my wife and I donated our entire collection to the Auburn Avenue Research Library in Atlanta, Georgia. And this series of discussions is based on some of the comics you can find in the collection that's housed at the library. With me today, again, I have the pleasure of having Mr. Morris Gardner, who is a librarian at the Auburn Avenue Research Library. Hey, Morris, how's it going?
It's good, man. It's all good.
Good. Thanks for having me on. And I also have the extreme pleasure of introducing a good friend of mine. His name is Reginald Mckee. Not only is he a comic enthusiast, but I say Reggie is somewhat of a celebrity in the soccer scene around here in Atlanta. So if none of you know what a capo is, I'll let Reggie introduce himself and tell you a little bit about himself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Reginald Mckee, and as Big West said, yes, I am a capo with Atlanta United, specifically with Footy Mob, which is one of the supporter groups. And a capo is just someone who is kind of like a choir director slash band director slash drum major, and we just lead the chants and get everybody hyped at games.
If you've ever watched the Atlanta United game and watch how hyped they are, it's partly due to Reggie leading the chants, like you said. So it's a great pleasure to have you all with us, man. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. So let's get into it. Today, we are going to be talking about the impact of the Black Panther, which is a subject that's really near and dear to my heart. So I hope we'll have a lot of fun with this. But we chose this topic today for a few reasons. First of all, because as we were taping the last episode of this, one of the things that happened right prior to that was Chadwick Boseman passed away. So RIP to Mr. Boseman, and we wanted to kind of pay homage to his contribution to not only the Marvel universe, but kind of to the industry, to the entertainment industry as a whole. So we're going to touch on him and his impact a little while later on this episode. But one of the things that's kind of interesting, that's very interesting about the Black Panther is that whole storyline is deeper than I think a whole lot of people realize. So we're going to try to touch on some of those topics today, and specifically how the Black Panther's evolution has kind of almost mimicked our own, because that's kind of the purpose of Superheroes in Color. We like to show how Black comic book characters and storylines reflect us in the culture, especially when you put it around the context of the time that they were in. So we're going to look at the Black Panther through that lens today. And so we'll take a step back and just kind of go through how Black Panther kind of came about and some of the things that happened almost to it for his journey up until today. And let's start with when Black Panther came into the whole comic universe. So back in 1966, which I'm going to go out on a limb, gentlemen, and say that predates all of us. It doesn't predate me by much, but 1966 predates.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. So the Black Panther's first appearance was in a Fantastic Four number 52 issue, by the way, which is in 1966. And that 52, 53, and 54 comic was, it's actually in the Auburn Avenue Library collection. So when we can get back in, we invited you guys to definitely come down and take a look at it. If you look at that issue, one of the things that's really interesting, gents, is you will see on the title cover where it talks about, you know, how this is the comic and talking about when Black Panther comes in and all that. I saw something that was really funny on that title page. There's a little blurb that says, voted the greatest tale of the month. And if you look down right under it, it says by Stan and Jack. And what's funny about that is that's, of course, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, the two people who invented the Black Panther and wrote it, right? So Black Panther was, of course, invented by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. We'll talk a little bit about them as we go along. But the Black Panther, that storyline is given credit as being the first Black superhero to kind of be in a mainstream comic. But he's not the first Black character, right? Reggie, I know you've written about some other characters and some of the history of other characters and that type of thing. So I'll tell you what, let's take a step back before we talk about Black Panther and how we got about it. Just take a brief minute, kind of pay homage to some of the other Black characters that came before Black Panther. Reggie, are there any that jump out to you?
Yes, actually, there's one by the name of Blue Marvel that not many people may know about. David Laveau, and Howard University graduate, screenplay writer, director. He's done a lot of things, but he created him in about, I guess maybe about 10 years ago. And he said it back in the era, in the 50s, prior to when Black Panther would have been introduced. And he introduced him, and part of the issue with Blue Marvel was that he was aware of the political environment of the time, and so he intentionally wore a mask so that you wouldn't know who he was.
Wow.
And by the time Black Panther was introduced by Stan and Jack, most people didn't know that this story was kind of hidden because he had actually retired and had hidden himself from view. So Blue Marvel is actually a superhuman on a par with Superman. He's that powerful, and he's as brilliant as T'Challa and Shuri. But all of this was a late addition. It was just set during that time period, a little bit before Black Panther.
That's amazing. And there were other characters, if you go way back to the 40s and you think about some of the stuff that Will Eisner did with the Spirit and all that, most of the characters, I think, prior to Black Panther were really more either sidekicks or caricatures, right? You think like Whitewash Jones and Ebony White and all these guys from the 40s was extreme caricature people. So Black Panther really marked kind of more of a mainstream acceptance of Black folks. And in 1966, then, of course, the political climate was turbulent to say the least. And Morris, what we help us frame like kind of the historical, the climate of 1966.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, it was really volatile. I mean, every summer during those 60s, similar to this summer during the 2020, a lot was going on. And you had this really powerful dynamic where the Voting Rights Act was passed, but actually trying to enforce that is a problem in the South, a problem throughout the country. And there is some movement where you see some Blacks getting elected to positions, throughout the country, but there's still this weight of the predominantly Black community as a totality is still underneath that oppression of racism. So you look at the Watts riots in 1965, you also have the Vietnam War, which is a really important element, I think, in terms of being an active hot war where, African-American men are going over, fighting overseas and coming back with a more radical notion of, what they envision the country to be. And one of the things that I thought really kind of framed it really well was that same year in 1966, James Meredith was shot by a sniper trying to walk across the South for voter registration. And when that happened, there's a scene when, after he shot, Dr. King and Stokely Carmichael are walking together. And in that walk, there's an interview, and you can see where Stokely Carmichael, for one of the first times, actually puts the concept of Black power out into public view. So it was a very valuable time with some very important historical references that I think Stan and Jack were actually trying to incorporate, into this character.
Yeah, that's real deep. And it's a great point because I looked up and I tried to see if I could tell kind of what was the motivation behind Kirby and Lee creating Black Panther, right? And there was I think a 1998 or so interview where Stan Lee said he wasn't really trying to be, wasn't thinking a lot about civil rights. As a matter of fact, he's quoted with saying, "I had a lot of friends who were Black and we had artists who were Black. So it occurred to me, why aren't there any Black heroes?" So it's interesting. And this is what I want to start off with, kind of seeing what you gentlemen think. In one way, the Black Panther, especially coming out in that volatile time, represented a lot of parallels with civil rights. But I wonder, and I want to see what you guys think, is how much of this was a civil statement and how much was it just pure marketing from the standpoint of, we had an emerging market right now that we could capitalize on. There's a Instagram post from Jack Kirby's grandson, and Jeremy Kirby is his name. And he said in 1960s, my grandfather felt we needed a Black superhero, which, you know, that you could take that anyway. Was that a civil or marketing move, right? So what do you guys think? And I know all this is conjecture because we don't have any way of really validating this, but I'm just wondering, looking back and thinking about what Stan Lee had to say about it, you think there was some civil rights kind of baked into that, or do you think it was a brilliant marketing move for the time? And how about it, Reggie? We'll start with you.
I think it was both. I think they had to use the business side of it to kind of support their idea to me. But I think it made a lot of sense. I think just if you look at the times, and even now, I mean, representation matters for a very good reason.
Yes.
And you can go back to the studies of that they did with Black children and the black and white doll from the 50s, and the kids would automatically choose the little white doll, and these were small children. Mm-hmm. But we always wanted to see ourselves reflected in greater society. We wanted to see ourselves as heroes. Mm-hmm. We wanted to see ourselves on television and in movies. And when it comes to heroes, I mean, someone who's bigger than life, I mean, that went a very long way. So I think it was a little bit of both.
Yeah, I agree. Morris, what do you think as far as not only the civil rights side, because one of the things that I think Kirby and Stanley had to kind of defend throughout, especially when the Black Panther first came out, was this Black Panther is not affiliated with the Panther Party, right? Right. So how do you think this fits together?
Yeah, I think it's what you call it, an intersection of or a convergence of everybody's interests, right? Yeah. I mean, Stan Lee wanted to move comics. At the same time, you have this emerging Black market that has more disposable income, and he sees that as an opportunity. And I compare it to the same way that Jackie Robinson playing for the Brooklyn Dodgers and stepping on that baseball field was a tremendous civil rights achievement, but Major League Baseball needed that. They needed Black players. They needed that infusion of interest and whatnot. And you still got to think that he timed it out to where he also thought it was going to appeal to his traditional readers. On some level, he wasn't just going to like abandon who the people were that was the bulk of buying his comics, which were predominantly white. So I think in that global setting where you see like, even the concept that when people are talking about Africa, there's this decolonization of Africa during the 60s where a lot of countries are becoming independent. It's in Time Magazine and Life Magazine. So it's reflecting the world in the same way that, Superman punching Hitler in the jaw kind of thing during World War II. That's good for, promoting buying bonds and the war effort, but it's also moving a lot of comics at the same time. So I think it was definitely an interest conversion. And as it developed, you saw the pitfalls and the successes of as it kept, that evolution going.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point. And if you think about it, gents, the marketing aspect of this and the way you present, the way Black Panther had to be presented at that time, I don't think it was totally lost on Stanley and Jack Kirby. We'll talk about this as we look at especially the first issue. But, it's interesting to me when I was reading about Jack Kirby to find out that Jack Kirby was actually born Jacob Kurtzberg, right? So he knew that it took a certain amount of finesse to even bring not only Black Panther, but hey, himself into the mix, right? So I think that really, the whole point, like you said, I like that word, the intersection happens here where you have the points you're trying to make civil rights wise and the marketing, the way you have to push this thing. I think they met together, and that's another strong point of Black Panther. So let's move into then that very first issue that Black Panther shows up in. Black Panther showed up first in the Fantastic Fours, number 53 in 1966, like we said. And just to frame, gents, the way that Black Panther came into being. So the way he met the Fantastic Four was he sent a ship, let's call it a spaceship, for lack of a better term, right? It was a super advanced, technologically advanced airship plane that he sent to bring the Fantastic Four from America over to Africa to meet him. He didn't, there's no indication as to why he wanted to talk to them first, but hey, I need to see you, Fantastic Four, so I'm gonna send a plane for you, right? So he sends his plane, and the first thing that happens is in the opening scenes of that Fantastic Four number 53, they're riding, the Fantastic Four is riding in this plane, and they're tripping out a little bit because they was like, this thing is so technologically advanced, it's blowing my mind, right? And so the thing says something like, while he's riding, he knows that they're on the way to Africa now, and he says something like, how does some refugee from a Tarzan movie lay his hand on this type of gizmo, or this kind of gizmo, he said, which is mind blowing to me, right? So he's on the way to Africa. Think about this now. And he's calling the Black Panther a refugee from a Tarzan movie.
Right.
Now, when I first read this, of course, the first thing I did was take a step back. Like, what do you mean refugee from a Tarzan movie, right? But then as the story develops, you realize that, you know, Black Panther is being presented as this king of this nation, of this super technologically advanced society, right? So it kind of flips that on his head. But, so here's my question. Here's my first question to you guys. The way that Black Panther, their first interactions were presented with such racist overtones like that, how intentional do you guys think, you know, Kirby and Lee were in using that type of language? Did it give them the opportunity, like, I think, to flip that on his head, or was it a way to maybe endear people who he knowing the climate and knowing the type of language that was almost acceptable at that time? Was it just getting away with that type of language, or was it a better ploy to pull people in? What do you guys think when you hear the thing making a statement like a refugee from a Tarzan movie? Morris, let's start with you. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think your point about it being the language of the times is really important, because and I don't want to like overstate it that it wasn't something that was imbued in a lot of comics still at that time. And even the comics that come after that, there's still a lot of racial stereotypes and racial statements that are made that fit that same kind of language. Even within the Black Panther, as it evolves, it still takes a long time before you start to see a conscious effort to be devoid of that. And when you see more Black writers involved, more writers of color actually engage with it, then you start to see that definitive line being drawn about that character that we all love and now and represented in the movie, you know, that exists. But I think those early steps were just clearly reflecting the popular sentiment when you talked about Africa as a country, you know, or as a country, as a continent, that it was primitive and those kind of things. And so I think it did reflect that. I do think the effort to add that technology aspect into it reflects, like I said, that understanding that this emerging continent was starting to come into its own. So I do think there was a recognizing of, like, looking at the Life magazines and Time magazine articles about what was happening in Africa at the time, that there was a little bit of something's going on there. So I like to not overstate that, because I don't think it deserves it too much, but I think there was an element of a recognition of what actually was happening in the continent at the time.
Good. So, Reggie, do you think Kirby and Lee were intentionally using this language in order to flip it, or do you think it was just a reflection of where we were at that time?
I think it was both. And I think, you know, that was something that was just mentioned a little while ago, how it wasn't just about the times themselves. They were also thinking about their base. You know, the bulk of the subscribers to the comics were white men. Young white men. And so that made sense. I mean, I could see that. And it also reflected the times, because, I mean, that was not just in comics, that was in life. That was in all media. I mean, you go to Amos and Andy, you go to the TV shows, you go to, I mean, you just go over so much that has happened in this country and then worldwide. You look at how Africa was looked at, the continent, for hundreds of years. So that was not unusual to see that kind of sentiment. I do like the fact that I believe that they used it also as a ploy to kind of flip it. I mean, you know, I hate to go here, but I really want to go here. But if you think about the Dogon, and you think about Mali and Songhai, there were African societies that were at times 500 years ahead of Europe in terms of, science and also medical technology. So I like how they did that because it kind of flipped it and it brought a lot of interest to the character.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say, and maybe part of me is maybe a bit idealistic, but I want to say it was an intentional ploy to flip that as well. So we had issue 52 that kind of bled over, or actually set the groundwork for issue 53 and 54, where the Black Panther itself, and I'll tell you why I say it like that in a minute, was introduced, right? And then that storyline came about. And in 52, 53, and 54, the Fantastic Four, one thing that I just want to kind of throw out there, and guys, we don't give entire storylines away on this show because we want people to come in and read what actually happened for themselves. But I will tell you that the reason that Black Panther brought the Fantastic Four to Wakanda was to solicit their help in dealing with Claw at that time, because he stole some vibranium, right? He was going to make weapons with the vibranium, and they wanted him to help along with that effort. So now you got to read the rest to see what happened. But vibranium is pretty interesting because you guys know that that Captain America's shield was made out of vibranium as well, right? So it all kind of fits together here, where so much technology came out of Wakanda. So just wanted to kind of throw that in. But after this that whole thing, and by the way, it's pretty interesting. I really love these issues, and I'm really struggling with not giving too much away. But Black Panther brought the Fantastic Four to Wakanda and kind of set them up to begin with. He enlists them in a little fight so he can show them, look, I'm no joke. You have to understand what you're dealing with, right? So there was a fight between them that starts out, and he didn't go in too hard. He just gave them enough so they'll respect him when he got ready to tell them why he needed their help. So just want to throw that in, and we encourage our listeners to go and check those issues out. But moving out of 52, 53, 54, gents, I want to kind of move into how Black Panther has evolved, and specifically how Black Panther kept evolving to keep up with the times that whatever story that came out was reflected in, right? So one of the things that I guess we should set the stage for, that we should make sure everybody understands, is Black Panther is not a person, right? It's a title. It is, and as a matter of fact, T'Challa, which is a kind of Black Panther that we're familiar with, was not the first Black Panther or the only Black Panther for that matter. Gents, do you, and I'm happy to kind of elaborate on this, but do you have any input on like anything revolving other Black Panthers, any factoids you may be aware of? And I'm happy to kind of throw in whatever, but just want to give you guys a chance to ring in on Black Panther as a title and not as a person. Anything you want to throw in there?
Well, I'll jump in really quickly, not specifically about a factoid or anything, but one of the structures of the Black Panther, I think that was genius right there in terms of how it connected culturally with the community in terms of ancestors and that kind of thing.
Yes.
I don't know how much that was intentionally done or not, but you really see how it's rooted in the culture. And even though it was crafted out of two white artists, crafting it, there were some real touchstones as to that ancestral understanding that's inherent in the Black community. So that was one thread that just I think spoke to a lot of people. And again, back to the time frame of the origins of the Black Panther, 1966, that was our first Kwanzaa was actually celebrated in the 1966. So there you see there's this kind of desire within the Black community to reconnect with the continent in various ways. And those elements about that ancestral lineage of the Black Panther was definitely a vehicle for that.
Oh, that's a good one. And I wonder, because with Kirby, even though, you Sarah Morris, you had two white gentlemen. If you think about it, Kirby was actually Jewish, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, and of course, we just brought out that he kind of changed his name probably to fit into the society
Right.
he had to. But I'm sure he had a lot of those ancestral references built into him as well, whether he wanted to identify as Jew at that time or not.
Yeah,
right?
that's a good point. That's a really good point.
Yeah. So T'Challa's was one of the Black Panthers. Like I said, his father, right, T'Chaka, or I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly, was actually a Black Panther before him. If I don't know if you guys ever remember, there was a character. His name was actually Casper Cole, and he went by the moniker of the White Tiger. Yeah, White Tiger was interesting just because he impersonated Black Panther for a while, right? But he was a biracial. I think he was a New York City cop, if I'm not right? And so there have been others, but here's what I wanted to kind of segue into. You know, T'Challa's sister Shuri has also served as a Black Panther. And, you know, I've heard like different rumors and different scuttle that in upcoming movies, she may even be a Black Panther. But one of the things that I find really interesting, especially if you parallel the time that we're living in now, you know, the whole, I don't guess feminism is a real term anymore, but let's say women empowerment, right? That's as strong an issue as, because we got a very strong female candidate for vice president, right? So we have very strong female empowerment now. And the thought of Shuri being a potential Black Panther, maybe even in the movie that's coming up, or, you know, if you look at the Dora Milaje, right? The women that protected Wakanda fiercely, right?
Yeah.
Let's touch on, if you will, just want to hear your thoughts, gentlemen, on how Black Panther helped bring out not only African-American empowerment, but female empowerment as well. Reggie, anything you got for that?
I wanted to say that the empowerment was just the way it was presented, not just in the movie, but in the later stages of the comics when Reginald Hartman, I think, had started writing. It was just seen as a natural progression.
Yes.
It wasn't seen as a statement. It wasn't seen as, oh, we're going to, it was just a natural extension of their society. Because it wasn't just that they were advanced technologically, but socially they were more advanced in the sense that everyone was treated equally. Everyone had equal footing. You had good and bad female and male characters. You know, in the comics, it was T'Challa who was the genius. It was T'Challa who had the mind on the level of Reed Richards and the Fantastic Four. But to see Shuri, she was actually the brains behind a lot of their technology, whether it was the camellia beads or how they use vibranium. That was brilliant. And I think it was empowering for young girls and women to see themselves reflected in that manner in the later stages of or the latest iterations of Black Panther. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things, just kind of piggybacking off that a little bit, is that, and it was all rooted in real cultural expressions and history of the continent. It wasn't like some of these things just came up whole cloth. There were women warriors that, you know, existed, you know, real figures, real people. And that's the beauty. I mean, one of the like criticisms is, you know, Wakanda is not a real African country and that kind of thing. And that's maybe a valid criticism. But one of the things I found actually fascinating about it, they were able to pick these really rich pieces from all these different cultures and kind of bind this kind of aspirational, you know, kind of existence, picking these pieces. And that female empowered piece was definitely something that enriched the story and really gave, again, that intersection of, yeah, young women are going to start to pick up this comic and wear the t-shirts, but also at the same time really have a strong, you know, Black feminist lens on it. With Roxane Gay coming in and actually writing out those later comics, you know, she really brought that in full force. So it was behind the scenes as well, not just, again, you know, a surface where it wasn't the own voice kind of thing. She was actually engaged with, you know, continuing those narratives.
Yeah, and that's a great point that you bring out, because I think back to where when Christopher Priest started writing, and Morris, you brought out a little earlier how the context and the dialogue changed to maybe start to weed out some of those kind of negative connotations and those negative references, and how you can see really almost the characters, you know, these are superheroes. So I hasten to use the word normalized, right? But you can see how their speech was almost normalized at some point, which is a kind of segues into the great point that Reggie made is that there was not, even I think when the Black Panther started, there was not this intentional, overt, hit you over the head statements about anything civil rights, about the way we get along, right? There was, a matter of fact, and I want to talk about some of you guys' favorite, maybe Black Panther moments, some of the things that kind of stick out to you. But one of the things that sticks out to me is there was a issue, and I'm trying to think, I think it was around 1973 or so, because Black Panther, when he went out and when Black Panther started to get his own storyline, it started in the Jungle Action series, right back in the 70s. And around, I think, issue 6 or so of that series, there was 3 issues where the Black Panther took on the Klan, right? Yeah. So it was Black Panther versus the KKK, which is some amazing covers. If you go back and look at those, or if you get to come down to the Auburn Avenue Research Library and look at the collection, you will actually can see those covers. But it was, there you go. There you go. That's the cover I'm talking about. Yes. That was an amazing, but you know, we talk about overt hit you over the head. Now that was a little bit hit you over the head right there, right? But what happened was there was even a time, and I apologize, I don't know exactly when this happened, but there was a post that was put on social media that went semi-viral a while ago, and it said the way that this particular issue that we're talking about, the way that it came about was Marvel told Kirby and Stan Lee didn't write that, I'm sorry. When Jungle Action came in, McGregor was actually writing then. We told Dan McGregor that they needed more white people represented in the Black Panther series. So McGregor answered that by doing this one where the Black Panther beats up the entire Ku Klux Klan, right? But that turned out to be false. That was a false narrative. That never happened. He obviously was never told that, but it shows how fake news can kind of, and that parallels a lot about today, right? How fake news it can take on. That's right. But what I wanted to kind of segue to is we're talking about some of the moments that stand out for us now. That moment stood out for me, not only because it was such a bold kind of statement because there was one issue, I think in that second issue of the series where Black Panther is actually up on a cross, right? And he's looking down at him and the Klans got on their hoods.
Torches.
And looking up at him. Yeah, yeah, it's some bold comics, and that stands out to me, but it's also amazing. If you look through that Jungle Action series, that's where the Black Panthers storyline started evolving, right?
Yeah, and I think it's rooted in when you look at like the progression of Black pop culture. I mean, you right in the thick of the Black exploitation.
Yes, that's what I wanted to
do. Superfly, and these, you know, people are taking on the man in this very visceral way, the hard way.
Yes,
so it becomes that, you know, is this almost overtly aggressive stance that recognizes, you know, that kind of racism and that kind of whatever. I mean, one of the things I think that I just want to mention real quick when you're talking about it, I do like some of the conversation about, you know, that they didn't take a total stance that was just hit you over the head, but even the concept that they stuck with the concept of the Black Panther, the actual name speaks volumes. There's a nuanced understanding within the Black communities from Huey Newton, and there's even documentation of it being a Black soldier battalion in World War II. I think it was the tank battalion that was called the Black Panthers, and that was their insignia, you know, during the war. And so there was a strong understanding that I believe that couldn't have been missed by Stan Lee and Kirby when they said that was going to be the name. So even that name stuck and you know, was adhered to the character, you know, throughout this evolution. was a really big statement. But those pieces fit firmly within the direction of pop culture, particularly Black pop culture, in that Black exploitation time frame.
Yeah, we're definitely one of the shows that we definitely have to do is around Black exploitation, right? Because or Black exploitation, like they call it, because you had characters like Black Goliath and Brother Voodoo and all those guys back in those days. Yeah, you remember those, Reggie? Did any of those characters strike a chord for you?
Yeah, I remember Brother Voodoo was introduced. What was that? The Marvel 2-in-1?
Yes.
When the Thing and T'Challa had to deal with him.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, so that was a real interesting time. And even if you think about when Luke Cage first came out, right?
Oh, yeah,
A little earlier than that, he came out and Luke Cage really went through some stereotypical moments, and we'll have to touch on that. So,
that's a whole nother 2 hours on
exactly.
Just in certain jury alone. Yeah.
That's real talk. I don't know if you guys ever watched the series, the Luke Cage series, but there was a really nuanced thing and I don't remember, honestly, guys, what was happening, but I think he had just gotten, I want to say out of jail, or he gotten out of somewhere. And when he got
from that that facility they were doing experiments on.
That's right. He got out of, remember he had on the yellow shirt and the hair, and he looked at a reflection of himself. He looked at a reflection and he said, I look like a damn fool. Remember that? And I thought, if you understand where Luke Cage comes from, that's a really deep statement right there. Yeah, so we'll definitely touch on him as we go along. But so that whole Klan episode, that whole Klan stuck out to me, guys. And, as like I said, so we move through Jungle Action, and that's where Jungle Action is, by the way, where Killmonger is first introduced in that series. But another one that kind of jumps out to me is if you guys think back when Black Panther and Storm were married, right?
Yeah.
And that was huge because you had like the Civil War going on, and for that wedding, they actually called a ceasefire so everybody could come to the wedding, right? And I thought that was amazing. There was some really awesome artwork around there where everybody had assembled for their wedding. And there's all these really cool things. If you look in the background, you look back there, Iron Man has a camera, but he's like floating up in the air so he can get the perfect picture, in there. Yeah. And Bishop is then he's kind of turned to the side, and he's got a tear coming down out of that one eye that works, right? So that whole series, the thing, and by the way, what was it? 5 or 6 years later, they got divorced, guys. They couldn't stick it out.
Black love can't survive, man. Not even in the comics.
Not even in the comics. But those two kind of are my pivotal moments. And I want to hear from you, Jensen, if you have anything along the Black Panther's evolution that kind of jumps out to you.
I think for me, I wanted to go back to when Ramita did that version of Black Panther. What was that, about 10 years ago? Mm-hmm. And they actually went from that. They did an animated series of it, and they showed it on BET late night for a while, where they actually took the panels from that comic and used CGI to animate it. But in that storyline, they talked about, and I think we had mentioned this earlier, they talked about how Black Panther was a representation for Wakanda. He was the protector. And it was T'Challa's grandfather who had run into Captain America at the time. And in that story, it shows how Steve Rogers had been dropped into Wakanda and was trying to seek out the vibranium. He he's tracking Nazis. And then 2, he was trying to see if he could get some of that vibranium to use with the United States. And he ran into T'Challa's grandfather. And I'll just say this: he was a little arrogant, and he kind of personified America at that time. A little full of themselves, and so he didn't take it too seriously, and so he had to learn a lesson. And I'll stop there. That was very important to me because it showed not only where they advanced in, but that was not the first time that Wakanda had to remind people who they were. So I like that version. I like the Reginald Hudlin version. To me, that's when I saw the Dora Milaje. That's when I saw him taking on much more of a political representation for his country. That's when he was not just, I mean, we said he was king, but to see him recognized as such, to see him identify as leader of the country, and these were not just two ladies who accompanied him; they were his bodyguards.
Yeah,
so how good were they that they had to protect him? And then, of course, the most recent version of Black Panther, when Coates took over. And you saw a lot of the things that he introduced, a lot of those things found their way into the movie, from the Kimoyo beads to just the way vibranium was being used, and just the recognition of how advanced this country was. It really stood out to me. And so I think just seeing Black Panther as he has evolved, it's come full circle to me.
Yeah, definitely full circle.
Yeah, because to me, I always go back to ancient history, and it's just a representation of what was.
Yeah, that's very good. And Coates is amazing. And when Water Dancer first came out, I could not wait to read that, and it definitely did not disappoint, because his writing, you can tell that he does the research to do just what you said, Reggie. He incorporates like real life elements into what's a otherwise fictional story, right? And to see those references is probably the reason I really like Coates a lot. I'm still a Priest guy. That's still my man, because that kind of represents, that's kind of my era, my reckoning. But the way Coates kind of brings in those real life elements to your point is amazing. Morris, brother, what do you say? Are there any Black Panther moments that jump out for you?
I think that the evolution and where it ended when it was in Coates' hands, where you really start to see these complex narratives take place, where you go from him being on the cross facing the Klan, which is bold statement and whatnot, but the complex narrative, even the villains and their motivations behind, should T'Challa have all this power over the community? Should the challenges become really nuanced and thoughtful, and I really always appreciate that when I was reading the most recent versions of those comics. But being able, like you said, to track the evolution to get to where the villains are just as interested, and sometimes you even question, should there be a king? There was some underlying things about how Wakanda was ruled, where some of that showed up in the film. Of course, in Michael B. Jordan's character, I would just love to see more of that kind of nuanced kind of examination of it as a country, because it really brought everything to life for me. It really brought that this is a really complex society, not just technologically, but how it's governed, people asking questions. And I think those are one of the things that last installment was just that really nuanced kind of thing that I just thought, this is a perfect setting for an explosion to wherever else. Of course, it spans the galactic Black Panther, and moving to, a more universal kind of space. So I think that was a great platform to really introduce people to the character, who may not be familiar, with the comic at all. So I really like that Coates effort. That's the one that I gravitate to a lot.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. And I'm thinking about it, and we'll segue into the movie and just talk about your feelings, gents, when that movie came out, because that's one of those I remember where I was moments, like when I went to see Black Panther. But to your point, Morris, when you talked about Michael B. Jordan's character, one of the things that I remember sitting in the movie and watching him being mad because T'Challa was king, and him challenging him for the kingship. And I was sitting there thinking, every family has one of those cousins, right?
just wrong, right?
Just a wrong cousin. You're like, why you invite Baby to the barbecue?
Right.
We gonna cause trouble. Yeah, exactly. But I want to touch on that, because I think, as much as Black Panther's evolution through the comics was important, I honestly think that the movie showing up was a pivotal moment as well. Not only because it made a gajillion dollars. I don't know how much that thing made, but I know it grossed really heavily. But what it does, I think it further pushed the Black Panther narrative itself into the mainstream. And probably, honestly, a lot of people maybe even had heard of the Black Panther that didn't have the type of exposure that maybe we have, got to know him a little bit, right? And I remember when the movie premiered and, the weeks afterward, folks was dressing up, right? Putting on their kente cloth and that type of stuff to actually go to I did myself, right? We had some stuff made to go to this movie. And so what I wanted to touch on really quick was not so much of the storyline, but your personal feelings, gents, when this movie came out. How did you feel seeing it released? And then how did you respond to that? Did you go see it and did you go all out when you went to see the movie? Morris, let's start with you, brother.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing equivalent that I had for me personally was when Roots came out. That there was this collective kind of Black consciousness that had totally adhered to this event of this film coming out. And it was one of those things that you took everybody. It didn't matter how old you was or whatever. I mean, you really took the whole family, grandmothers was in there. So it really was. And I think what it tapped into for me and the people that I saw it with is that it had this aspirational kind of feel to it that affirmed Blackness in a really significant way as terms of the women within the film, their skin color, how it was, all those things were really important. And I think the creators of the film paid particular attention to that. They didn't miss any of those touchstones within affirming Blackness that has rarely been done, in cinema. And Roots is the only thing I can touch on. And I didn't do the full regalia and all that. I didn't go that far. But T-shirts, I still got stuff in the closet, with the Black Panther. But I was there, even with the comics and whatnot. But no, I really felt and I think the other thing about it too that was important was that the powerful narrative and storyline that it crafted out with the African-American experience versus the African experience. And it touched on some really interesting points and it touched on some really interesting dynamics that I felt just elevated the movie that I only think, within the culture, we could have that conversation about, what that kind of means. And so I think that it brought that conversation to light was a really powerful piece.
Excellent point. What about you, Reggie? How'd you respond to the movie coming out?
Oh, I went all out. The whole family did. So, we had our regalia, and ironically, it was the same weekend that my twin boys, they turned 21. And so they were in school at the time, and so they invited their friends to a nice birthday dinner. And so everyone showed up to dinner dressed up in regalia. We left there, and we went as a family down to Atlantic Station. Yeah. That night it premiered, and everybody was regal. And it was so beautiful to see that all these people waiting to see the movie. It was just everyone was in regalia.
Yeah,
I would have thought it was a crowd. I would have thought it was, I would have thought I'm in Abuja or somewhere. I mean, I was sitting here wow.
Yeah,
and
that's amazing.
Was just so proud. And so the thing is, my father and his wife, my father and my stepmother, they flew down. My in-laws, they flew in. And so it was this cross-section of generations that went to go see this movie. And so I remember I was in the theater at one point, and I believe it was the first scene when T'Challa went to visit his ancestors and he wanted to see his father. And the theater was lit up and you could kind of look around. So we were kind of in the middle of the theater and I looked around just to kind of see people's reactions and everyone was just 100% into the movie. Everyone was just completely into it. And the fact that it touched on so many different aspects, like you all were just saying about African versus African-American culture, it tried to answer some of the questions, and a lot of people sympathized with Killmonger. A lot of people were like, where was Wakanda? When all of these things were going on, when we went through so much in terms of civil rights and, losing Malcolm and Martin, and you think about Lumumba, you think about all these things that have happened, not just in America, but all over the world to people of color, and specifically to Black people. And here's a country that could have intervened or done something at some point. It makes you wonder how many Killmongers were created from something like this. So it forced the conversation that I think we have been having separately, for generations. And I like how they really touched on that.
Yeah, that is such good stuff. Well, gentlemen, we're coming in for the home stretch right now. So one of the things that I want to kind of start winding down with you guys is two things. I want to touch on Chadwick Boseman's kind of contribution, like I said, as an actor to the Marvel universe, to the cinematic universe as a whole. And one of the things I said at the beginning of this is we wanted to kind of pay homage to him because I think his portrayal was so huge. And I don't think they could have got a better person for him. But one of the things that I was kind of struck by, and I don't know how many people picked up on this as well, but he did so much work sick, right? Going through the end stages of the cancer that he was battling. And he went about his work. He handled his business through that all. So I think that's such a big testament to him and such a big takeaway I took from like hearing his kind of after stories, the moratoriums afterwards. But I just wanted to kind of pay homage to him here on this show because again, he made such a big contribution to bring Black Panther to all of our consciousness, right? Any thoughts about him and his portrayal, guys, that you have, Reggie?
It was just so heartbreaking when I found out that we lost him, and then, like you said, as the stories came out that he'd had cancer, and he was just fighting through it, no excuses.
Right.
No excuses. And I think one of the things that struck me about not just Chadwick, but just the entire cast of the movie is that everyone was aware of the significance of the movie. They knew they had a task ahead of them and they treated it with such respect. Yeah. They did their research. They did not just throw a costume together. Yeah. They made sure that it was reflective of the different societies on the continent. They looked at the languages. They made sure that, they used socio, throughout the movie. Chadwick did so much. He didn't take a role that did not reflect the culture in a very positive light. And he made it a point to do his homework. I think as the Black Panther, he brought that dignity to that role that I think I had an idea in the comics, but I never got to see it personified like he could in this film. I don't know if anyone else could have done what he did the way he did it. And, and then now that he's gone, I don't know if they're going to move on from him. There's rumors about who could be the next Black Panther, but I just appreciate that he did he was a personification of his craft, meaning he respected it, he loved it, and he wanted it to show exactly who we were. So I just give kudos and props to him. He was actually a superhero.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Morris, what are your thoughts about Brother Boseman?
Yeah, I think, when you think back on it, you think about actors that kind of transcended, the craft of acting and become these kind of iconic figures like a Sidney Poitier that represent this kind of aspirational Black man in these positions of power. And I think he definitely did. And I find it fascinating that he played Thurgood Marshall, he played Jackie Robinson, he played James Ryan. just the litany, but they all stand alone. None of them are like you watching Chadwick Boseman be. He really brought what it was to, be those people with the dignity and pride. And particularly with the Panther, one of the things that I felt like was what he did was he anchored the film in all of that. You still could have all those special effects, you could have all the things, but that humanity that he brought to the character and anchored it. But then what I liked about the film was that vulnerability that was played out, that the community is what actually saved Wakanda. It wasn't this superhero that was invulnerable and could come in and save the day. And that was a message that I really thought, tied in well to, the Black experience, overall, that at the end of the day, it was the community, including them brothers who had to come in, and save the day, and so that was a really important point. And even when you look at the villain, I really liked, and I would even liked it more, but I really liked the complex relationship that he had with Michael B. Jordan. And I felt like I wish they wouldn't have killed him off. I wish they would somehow kept that tension going, because that's always been the dynamic of the comics, right? It's always that villain that creates that tension. And I think those were the things. And I think he was kind of his Batman to the Joker kind of thing. On some level, that tension was a really strong anchor. But in terms of what Chadwick Boseman did with the piece, I mean, it was just, you know, you could tell he was groomed from South Carolina to Howard to whatever to actually be that for our people, you know, and he brought all of that experience, you know, to it. And in his passing, you just saw the outpouring. You did see far beyond just the actor. It was far beyond, you know, just somebody who had played a role. It truly meant something to the community.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely. Well, gentlemen, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time, your insight, your expertise. We like to wrap up our episodes with a little section we call What Say You? And in this What Say You, what I would like to hear from you guys is, what say you about the future of the Black Panther in either comics or in maybe some future, you know, cinema to come, whatever you like to touch on. What say you about the future of Black Panther? And Reggie, since you're our special guest for the day, let's start with you. What say you about Black Panther's future?
Oh, Black Panther's future. I think the sky's the limit now. I think they've made the introduction. Now you know who Wakanda is. You know what the Black Panther represents. I think culturally, I think in terms of science, I think in terms of just how everyone is treated within that society. I think now they can take it there. I think they can take it to that next level. So what say I? I say I'm looking forward to more of it. And I think now we have what we've always needed in terms of that representation.
Yeah, great. Morris, what say you about the Black Panther's future?
Man, I am on Team Chere, man. I think she's the future of the Black Panther. So whatever goes down, man, I think she's the central catalyst for how it all happens, man. And what's beauty of it, like when you know, it's like when they say you nominate a Supreme Court judge when they're 40, they that person for life. She's young, you know. We're gonna see her evolve, you know, throughout the next 2 decades and see where that character goes. But I really feel like the way that it was portrayed, the actress, and I don't remember her name, but the actress that portrayed her was like amazing. And I think that is really going to be a touchstone that anchors any future movement in both the comics, you know, and the films. I hope so. I just really love that character.
Yeah. So my what say you, gentlemen, is like Morris. I am Team Chere all day long. I think that not only is she, you know, a great representation of the future of Wakanda and of the brand itself, but she brings in a whole new side of a demographic to bring in, right? So you get the whole female empowerment thing that's really working. I like that storyline from even a marketing perspective, right? It just works on so many levels. And my other what say you is, can Black Panther and Storm get back together, right? Can we rekindle this relationship? I mean, you know, I don't know, it's going to be hard to replace Chadwick in that role if we talk about cinema. So I don't know if we ever truly see that play out on screen, but certainly in the book, maybe we can see that play out. That might be an interesting, that'll make for an interesting storyline if that can happen as well.
Yeah. And that's another topic, Black love in the comics.
There we go. There we go. Stay tuned, ladies. Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. Well, as I said, guys, thank you so much for your time. It is always a pleasure, not only to talk this subject, but to talk it with gentlemen like yourself that really know your stuff, and such a pleasure to talk to. I am going to wrap things up by just kind of reminding everybody that Superheroes in Color is all about how culture is reflected in comic books through storylines. And for me, Black Panther represents Superheroes in Color as a whole, because Black Panther has evolved and represents just what this show tries to portray. With that said, I want to invite all of our listeners to keep up with and give us your feedback. Give us your thoughts about anything we've said on our social media channels. SHIC Social, Superheroes in Color, SHIC Social on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you'd like to hear or see in future stories, but really let us know what you think about the way Black Panther has been portrayed through his evolution. And on our newsletter, if you go to superheroesincolor.com, you can sign up for our newsletter where I have gone through and picked out some of my favorite Black Panther moments. So if you subscribe to our newsletter, you can get the top 5 Black Panther moments. And I grabbed some captures of that artwork just to portray those Panther moments. And I invite you to respond to any of those on our social media channels and let us know what your favorite Black Panther moments are. Again, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Until next time, everybody, we'll see you back here again. Keep reading, fam.